Welcome, everybody, to the NFL Show on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. The NFL Show is brought to you by Replenishing Care and Technologies. Make sure you go check them out at rcandt.com. Check out specifically the PEMF machine that me and their founder, James Comerford, did a show about last week. You'll definitely want to check that out. I am your co-host for the NFL Show, Mike Goodpaster. Right now, I'd like to welcome in my co-host, NFL beat writer, Sam Teets. How you doing, Sam?
I'm doing great, Mike. How about you?
All right. And today we're going to go a little historical since there's no Cleveland Browns fans, and yesterday's show didn't do near as well as the Bengals show. You know, the Bengals show got 20 times more listens or views.
I mean, that's not shocking, though, is it?
No, because the Bengals are probably the most popular team in my house. But, all right. Today we're going to top 10 defensive ends of all time. And, Sam, I'll let you start it off at number 10.
Yeah, it was difficult narrowing down 10. Look, there's really 13 or 14 guys who I consider for a top 10, but I have Chris Dolman at number 10. And this guy was currently number 5 in terms of sacks, at least we know of, because, of course, sacks weren't kept officially until the early 1980s. He's number 5 all-time in officially confirmed sacks with 150.5. He's only one of 5 guys with over 150 sacks in his career. 8 Pro Bowls, 2-time first-team All-Pro. And he led the league in sacks with 21 in 1989. This guy was a dominant force. He has the size to go out there and compete right now and still be a dominant player despite playing in the 90s.
Like the 90s were a long time ago.
Well, for me, it feels like a long time ago.
Yeah, it was before you were born, wasn't it, Sam?
I was in there in 1999.
All right. I'm going to go more old guys on this list anyways, but my number 10 is Jack Youngblood. And it's not just because, my sister thought he was really hot. Jack Youngblood, I played on some great Rams defenses. He was a 5-time first-team All-Pro. That's not a Pro Bowler. First-team All-Pros, a hell of a lot more important. But the toughness, dedication that he had, when you look at this, Super Bowl 14, he played with a broken leg. He played in 201 consecutive games, according to the LA Times. One of the league's all-time great pass rushers. He started his career off playing next to Merlin Olsen. And one guy I would like to bring up, since you brought up Chris Dolman, and I know he's a defensive tackle, but John Randall, I think, really gets undervalued. And I think he's a lot of the reasons why Chris Dolman had the kind of numbers he had.
I wonder why that is now. I'm gonna ask you, is that because there's so many other great defensive linemen in Vikings history? Is that why he gets overlooked so often?
I wouldn't think that would be it, because most of the other great ones, like the Jim Marshalls, the Alan Pages, all came in the 1970s. So this was a completely separate time. I would think this. I think that maybe that changes if in 1998 that field goal's made and they go to the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl, then you may have a different thought on Randall. I really don't know why that is the way it is, because when I talked to offensive linemen for the Legends show that played against John Randall, he's hands down the toughest guy that they had to block. And he's still, I think he's top 10 all time in sacks. And it just blows my mind that John Randall doesn't get the recognition he deserves.
Yeah, he's tied for 10th in career sacks with 137.5 with Richard Dent. And I agree with you. I don't know how. Whenever I go back and watch film with John Randall, he's always the crazy guy out there. He's always screaming. He's always beating guys down. He's beating double teams left and right. I don't know how a guy like that can be so undervalued. And you're right, because you know what, when I think about the top defensive lineman, top interior defensive lineman of all time, I don't think John Randall immediately, but he is up there.
I think this. I think a case could be made. He might be the best one.
I don't know if I'd go that far, but he does have 6 first-team All-Pro selections, and those are really important.
Well, and the thing is this. He had hands and feet. I had never seen a guy with hands and feet like that. All right, we're at number 9. How about Ted Hendricks? That's a name you probably never even thought about, was it?
No, I usually would classify Ted Hendricks more as a linebacker.
Really? He was kind of an outside linebacker. That's the thing. Really, this list should probably be, top 10 4-3 defensive ends or top 10 3-4 defensive ends, because really the positions are completely different.
Yeah, that's fair. We're looking at a lot of different things if you do that. But number 9.
I was just asking your opinion of Ted Hendricks. I don't have him in my top 10. My number 9 is actually Willie Davis. And
okay.
I think Willie Davis is a guy that gets hugely overlooked when you talk about those great Green Bay Packer teams with Vince Lombardi in the 60s. Recovered 22 fumbles in a decade. He was a 5-time first-team All-Pro, and he was an integral part of that Green Bay defense that helped win them 5 NFL championships.
Yeah, I have him a little bit higher than you on my list, but just barely. My number 9 is who you put down number 10. We were actually pretty in step so far, but my number 9 is Jack Youngblood. And for all the reasons you said, I think the most incredible thing maybe about his entire career was he played that Super Bowl game with that leg injury, and he went and played the Pro Bowl afterwards on the same leg injury. So, I mean, nowadays, no one even wants to play in the Pro Bowl. So to go out there and play with that kind of injury like that, I think it just shows how tough he was and how determined he was to play no matter what.
Yeah, but back then, that Pro Bowl was an actual football game because the winning team got more money. I think it was like $10,000 to $6,000, and it's not like those guys were making a ton of money back then.
That's true. I guess there was a little more incentive. And he finished unofficially his career with 151.5 sacks. That was official. That would rank actually fifth all time. That would rank ahead of Chris Dolman.
All right, where are we at? Your number 8?
Yeah, my number 8. And you just brought him up. So I'm like I said, we're right there right now. Willie Davis is my number 8. For all the reasons you mentioned, I don't understand why so many of the original, I say the original, but so many of those Packer members on that all-time great team are overlooked nowadays. I think Willie Davis is one of the best defensive linemen you could say to ever play the game. He's 5 Pro Bowls, 5-time first-team All-Pro, 5-time NFL champion, 2-time Super Bowl champion. You talk about winning, you talk about being a part of a dynasty and being part of a great team. He's right there. I think he's part of one of the best defenses we've ever seen.
All right, my number 8 is Leroy Selman. I think Leroy Selman's a guy whose career wasn't as long as a lot of these guys, but just strictly watching him, his quickness and strength to harass quarterbacks and transfer. I mean, you got to remember, he goes to the Bucs in 76. 76, they go 0-14. 77, they lose their first 12 games. They were 0 in his first 26 games as an NFL football player. He was a 6-time Pro Bowler, 3-time All-Pro. Actually, 77 at the end of that season, I think they beat the Saints and the Falcons, or the Saints and the Cardinals. I can't remember which two. You get Doug Williams. 1978, they were competitive through the first half of the season, kind of dropped off. Then 1979, Leroy Selman won the NFL Defensive Player of the Year award. The Bucs defense allowed the fewest points and yards in the league and reached the NFC Championship game where they lost 9-0 to the Rams and Jack Youngblood. I mean, he is the epitome to me of an impact player. And you look at from 76 to 84, once they get through that first 2-year stretch that was bad, I mean, he was a pivotal reason why the Bucs went to the championship game in 79. In 1981, they won the division. They beat the Detroit Lions, if I remember right, the last game of the season in Pontiac Silverdome. And then 1982, they go to the playoffs again. So 3 times in 4 or 5 years from a team that, right at the start went 0-26. I mean, it's pretty impressive. And when you watch him play, I mean, it's a shame that his career was shortened the way it was. I think he only played like 7 or 8 years. But I think Leroy Selman was close to having the same kind of impact on the Bucs that Lawrence Taylor did on the Giants, if that makes any sense. It's harder to do from defensive end than outside linebacker.
No, I understand what you're saying. He played in 9 years. You have to wonder what if he played longer. I don't think he got to 86. He unofficially has 78.5 career sacks, including 18 from that 1974 season. Not 1974,
1979.
Yeah, there you go. And it's just incredible that it's just things that you can't see a guy like that play out a full 14-year career. Because you imagine what would he have done, where would he rank in terms of sacks if he had been able to play an entire career. And the fact that he has such a short stay in the NFL but still gets into the Hall of Fame just tells you the kind of impact he had.
All right, who do you get at number 7?
Yeah, number 7. And number 7, I've got a guy who I don't know quite as much about as you probably do, but I've got Doug Atkins at number.
I've actually got Doug Atkins significantly higher.
Yeah, I thought you might. I was having trouble evaluating Doug Atkins just because, like you said, there's a huge time difference between you and me. I didn't see him play, but
I didn't see him play either. He was in the 60s. I was born in 1968.
All right. But I mean, it's just he played for what? It was 15, 16, 17 years. He played a long time, 8-time Pro Bowler. And he's one I think when I think about him He's one of the original great defensive ends in the NFL, in my opinion. He's one of those first guys who really set the precedent for every other defensive end to come after him.
All right, I'm going to go number 7. I'm going to go Gino Martetti. And Martetti played a quarter of a century before the sack was officially a stat, so he doesn't appear in the record books. But he was an 11-time Pro Bowler, but a 9-time All-Pro, won 2 NFL championships with the Baltimore Colts. And more to the point, he played in an era when the passing game wasn't used nearly as often. And remember, the only prolific passer really in the NFL, maybe Otto Graham, but really Johnny Unitas, late 50s, early 60s, and Martetti was on his team. Now, the Colts dynasty was one of the greatest dynasties ever in the, mid-50s to about the mid to late 60s. They were powered by Unitas, Lenny Moore, Alan Amici, Raymond Barry, Jimmy Orr, Jim Parker. But Martetti was the centerpiece of that defense, a unit that was repeatedly among the top rated in the NFL. And I think him and Doug Atkins and Willie Davis, are all 3 guys that when you watch them on film, especially Atkins, just because of his size, those are guys that could play today.
Oh, yeah, Atkins was 6'8", almost 260. Yeah, a guy like that out there in the field. He could play almost any position on the defensive line today if he wanted to, especially that kind of athleticism.
Well, let me ask you this. What was your take on Howie Long? Because you probably don't have him in your top 10, right?
No, I don't. But it was very confusing. Howie Long was one of the guys I had in competition for the number 9 or 10 spots. It was Howie Long, Strahan, and Leroy Selman were all guys that had down that low. And it was hard for me to evaluate Howie Long just because he didn't have necessarily the numbers that some of the other guys had.
Well, Leroy Selman's a lot better than Howie Long. To me, Howie Long was a guy who was just consistently good for a long period of time. And I've got Michael Strahan at number 6. I don't count his record because Brett Favre laid down for him. But that Super Bowl 42, that defensive line for the Giants is what won him the game. And, he did set the record, even though I really think it should be a tie between him and Mark Gastineau or whoever it was. He was a 4-time first-team All-Pro, 1-time Defensive Player of the Year. And that's the thing that stands out to me. The Defensive Player of the Year award is huge for me when I evaluate this list.
Yeah, it's very hard to get high on lists without it. Though I do have a guy at 6 who doesn't have a Defensive Player of the Year award to his name. And probably maybe a little bit too high. We'll see what you say about it.
Who's your number 6?
I've got Carl Eller at number 6.
Nah.
Tell
me why.
Well, here's the thing. 5-time first-team All-Pro, 6-time Pro Bowler. He had unofficially has 133.5 career sacks, which would rank – where would that rank? He would rank about 13th all-time. And then he's got 7 seasons with 10 or more sacks. So I don't know. It's hard to evaluate Carl Eller for me because a lot of people had him ranked fairly high on their lists. I thought he was more around the mid group of the top 10 to me, the bottom of the top 10, but I've got him number 6.
I could see him there. The thing about Carl Eller, that defensive line was so good. I don't think there was anybody you could double team. So, but you could say the same thing about Deacon Jones, but the difference is this, and we'll get to Deacon Jones in a while. Deacon Jones was double teamed, even though he played on maybe the greatest defensive line of all time with the fearsome foursome. So, from what I remember watching Eller, I don't know that they doubled him a whole lot, and you had so many great guys around him. I could see him being up there, though. I don't really have a complaint with that. You could have put him in the top 5. I wouldn't have had an issue with it. So, where are we at? My number 5?
Yep.
All right. I'm going to say Chris Dolman. And even at number 5, he was not the greatest defensive end of his era, which we'll get to in a little bit, but it was kind of a case of bad timing. The thing about him was, other than an injury-plagued season with Atlanta, he didn't miss a single start between 1987 and 1998. He remains 4th on the all-time sack list leader. So I think he had Dolman a little lower, but I'm going to go Dolman there.
Like you said, he was a very good defensive lineman, just not the best of his era because bad timing. You really can't win out.
You got Reggie White, you got Bruce Smith. There's some guys.
It's just unfortunate. It's just not good timing for you. But you're not going to like this, but number 5, I've got J.J. Watt.
Nah. How long has he played?
9 years now, I think.
See, I don't like J.J. Watt just because his career is not over yet. And I think when you do an all-time top 10 list, you kind of need the full career. He could come out here and have his 3 best years ever the next 3 years, and really he might be the number 1 or 2 guy. I think J.J. Watt is a dominant player. I don't agree with putting guys on the list for all-time lists until their career is done.
No, that's respectable. I understand that.
I think
if you told me ahead times, I would have
10.
probably bumped him down. But I think, I like what he's done so far. He's one of the only guy in NFL history, I'm pretty sure, to have multiple 20-plus sack seasons officially. So, of course, there's also the 3 Defensive Player of the Year awards, too, which also makes it hard to deny just how great he's been.
Those don't hurt, but the other thing you got to realize is this. How good is J.J. Watt against the run compared to a Doug Atkins?
It's been hard to measure, but he has led the league in tackles for loss 3 times during his career.
Yeah, but I'm just saying offenses are different now than what they were back then. He usually doesn't have to deal with a fullback who's trying to lead block, and, you're getting the ball thrown around a lot more, which gives you a chance to maybe get more sacks. Of course, I could counteract that by saying the ball's being thrown a lot quicker, so that hurts your ability to get there. I think he's definitely top 10. I just think it's hard to pin him down until he's done. Who do you got at number 4?
Yeah, my number 4 is Gino Martetti, and I think maybe a little bit high compared to where you had him. But again, this is a guy who was arguably the first, or maybe the first or second greatest defensive end at the time they entered the NFL. I mean, we're talking about a guy who played in the early 50s into the mid 60s, an 11-time Pro Bowler, 2-time NFL champ, 7-time first-team All-Pro. And this is a guy who I forget, went back in the 1970s and had like an official vote, and he was voted the greatest defensive lineman of all time or something like that in the 1970s. So this is a player who's been dominant. He even claimed that at one point in time he had 9 sacks in a single game. I don't know if that's actually accurate or not. He made the claim that he was that good and he made that much of an impact.
Every defensive end claims they had that many sacks when there was no record kept. Because, a guy like Coy Bacon, I know literally did have 27 sacks in a season, because once you got to the late 60s into the 70s, Bacon did it for the Bengals, I think, in the mid-70s. But they actually would keep that as a stat off the record. Each team would keep that stat. And guys like Coy Bacon's a guy that could be on this list. I don't put him there because I've heard enough stories from guys that played against him to know that he could have been even better than what he was. My number 4 is a guy that I think is better than Martetti, Doug Atkins. Atkins played for the Bears. Early in the 60s, that was a good thing. Later in the 60s, not so much. He ended his career with the Saints. And as great as Martetti was, I think Atkins was the greatest defensive end of that era. And that was not just because, you got to look at Atkins' Bears were not as good as Marchetti's Colts. And once you get to 1964-65 and then he goes to the Saints, that kind of kills your career there. He did start with the Browns, but he's a guy that can play today. He was enormous. He was 6'8", and that was really unusual back then. And when you watch film of him, it was difficult even for a quarterback to throw a pass to the side he was on, because he was so big and he was so dominant against the 230, 240-pound tackles that played out back then, who were usually 6'2" or 6'3". Now, Atkins was a guy known to run his mouth, and he had a lot of run-ins with the Papa Bear, George Halas. And even though they didn't see eye to eye, George Halas, before his death, said that there was no doubt in his mind that the greatest defensive end ever played the game was Atkins. I don't think there's much else to be said past that, because I think George Halas, we can go with what he says. All right, we're to our top 3. My number 3 is Reggie White. And I know everybody's throwing a fit now saying that guy's an idiot, but he's number 3 to me. I just think there's 2 guys that were better and more dominant. I think his pass rushing skills and his sack totals peaked while he was in Philadelphia. Then he goes to Green Bay and really changed the culture at Green Bay, because I think if Reggie White never goes there, Sam, I don't think Brett Favre ever wins a Super Bowl. He was the reason other guys all of a sudden wanted to come there. And we talked about the greatest defenses of all time, and we talked about the 91 Philadelphia Eagles with Clyde Simmons, Jerome Brown, Reggie White, one of the greatest defenses of all time, playing with backup quarterbacks, still win, I think, 10-6. He signed that deal in 1993, and he instantly made the Packers' defense better. And you could point to his sack totals, which I think ended up just south of 200, like 197, 198. And he won a pair of NFL Defensive Player of the Year awards. and he helped them get to the Super Bowl twice. But the thing was, that night in New Orleans, when the Packers won their first Super Bowl in almost 3 decades, White absolutely abused offensive tackle Max Lane for the Patriots. And you watch clips from that game and try to name a better defensive end ever. It's really hard to do, but I'm going to try to give you 2 that I think were better right after you give me your number 3.
Yeah, my number 3 is Bruce Smith. And this is a guy I think you might have at number 1. You potentially have that high. But talk about a guy who was just dominant into his late 30s and even potentially into his early 40s. His last 10 sack season came in 2000 when he was 37 years old. And he put that in context, he came into the NFL in 1985. Just a guy who put together some tremendous campaigns, 11-time Pro Bowler, 8-time first-team All-Pro, 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, and he has the NFL record officially with 200 career sacks. So he's got all the numbers, he's got all the accolades. The one thing he's missing, of course, is a Super Bowl. He was a part of the Buffalo team that just could never quite put it together. He never got over the hump in the Super Bowl, but this is a guy who 14.5 career sacks in the playoffs. He's a dominant player. And if you wanted to pick a cornerstone player to build a defense around, and you could take any historical player, this is arguably one of the guys people will go out and choose just because he's transcendent. He's honestly just one of the best players you could ever get.
Yeah, I've got him at number 2. And the thing about him was the first 5 years of his career, he was one-dimensional. Once you get to 1990, the Bills' defense became significantly better because he became a lot more involved in defending the run. And I think the difference between him and Reggie White are 2 things. Number 1 is I think he improved and was a more complete player. I think that he was still dominant. You talked about that. I mean, he only missed 2 starts in his late 30s from 2000 to 2002, and he recorded 24 sacks in 36 games. And the other thing is this. The greatest left tackle to ever play the game was Anthony Munoz. And in 2014, I was at the Northern Kentucky Mardi Gras. He was the Grand Marshal. I was there because I was the head coach of the River Monsters team indoor football league. And I actually got to sit at a table with him. And we talked. And I asked him who the most difficult guy to block was. And he said there's only one guy that he ever had trouble with, and that was Bruce Smith. And if you watch the 88 AFC Championship game where the Bengals beat the Bills 21-10, for the first half of that game until Bruce Smith, tweaked, I think it was a hamstring or something, he was giving it to Anthony Munoz. And I don't think there's any offensive lineman it's ever been as good as Anthony Munoz. So to me, Bruce Smith is number 2. Who do you got at number 2?
Number 2, this has got to be your number 1 then. My number 2 is Deacon Jones. And I think you could definitely make the argument. I think you could flip-flop anyone in the top 3. In my mind, these top 3 guys are separate from everyone else. Before I even sat down to make this list, I already knew who the top 3 guys were. I just had to put them in order because they are that dominant. They are those generational players who will never be overlooked at any point in their careers. Deacon Jones, 8-time Pro Bowler, 5-time first-team All-Pro. This guy's a guy who claims he had over 20 sacks a couple times in his career is what he claimed. And he's unofficially credited with 173.5 career sacks during his time in the NFL. And that was in a 14-game season, over 14-game seasons during his career. So he really went out there every game, and he was just an unstoppable force.
All right, go ahead and give me your number 1.
Number 1, Reggie White.
Yeah, out of your mind.
And that's a little bit altered because of the sack data, because he has more sacks per game than guys like Bruce Smith or Deacon Jones potentially. But at the same point, I can totally understand why you're saying the other guys would be higher on the list. I entirely understand. To me, it's the top 3.
All right. My number 1 is Deacon Jones. I think number 1, he was on the greatest defensive line in NFL history, the fearsome foursome. He was the best player. And when you look at his sack totals, the team did keep sack totals from the 60s on. And there was a 20, a 26, a 24. But regardless of the validity of those claims, how can you not have him at number 1 when he invented the term sack? The thing I saw in the LA Times had an article 2009 where he talked about it. He said you take all the offensive linemen, put them in a burlap bag, and then you take a baseball bat and you beat on the bag. You're sacking them. You're bagging them. And, of course, you had the head slap. Now, I will give you this. My age probably has a lot to do with why Deacon Jones is number one, because, back in the day, back in the 60s and up to about the mid-70s, you had to double flat block as a guard or a tackle, which means you could only block like that. You couldn't use your hands. But then again, the ball wasn't being thrown as much. But once again, Deacon Jones was huge. Linemen weren't as big back then as they are now. So I think what you said about the top three being the top three is very accurate. I think you could actually have the three in any order as long as you have, Bruce Smith and Deacon Jones ahead of Reggie White.
Any order but the order I put them in, pretty much, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, when I watched Deacon Jones and Bruce Smith, especially after about 5 years with Smith, they just seem more complete than what White was. I think White he's the guy that hits 50 home runs every year, but he bats .250. And I think Bruce Smith and Deacon Jones were the guys that every year hit 30 home runs and bat .310. And they got a good glove. And I just think those guys are more valuable than the others.
I mean, that's fair. You have more firsthand experience watching them play than I do.
Hey, once again, I didn't see Deacon Jones play, just on film. So you can't give me crap about that. All right, Sam, anything else before we wrap it up?
No, I think we got all the ones we want to cover. Is there anyone else you thought could make the list or you could consider highly for the list?
Actually, it's me, and I'm older than you, so there's a lot of guys. I think Coy Bacon was a very underrated player. I mean, do you have any that you would bring up?
I mean, not really. I thought it was pretty clear cut. I left guys like Michael Strahan off. I left guys like Leroy Selman off, who obviously you had on your top 10. Maybe I spent more time. Maybe if I spent a little more time preparing, I would have come across them. But
how about this? I was going to say, what about Buck Buchanan?
I consider him more as a defensive tackle, but you're considering him a defensive end.
Well,
I would say probably top 5, right?
If you watch Super Bowl IV, they moved him around a little bit. It's kind of like I compare him. I mean, he's a lot taller than a Gino Atkins, but I think he's kind of like a Gino Atkins, where Gino Atkins is a defensive tackle, but every once in a while you see the Bengals put him in, and he's still kicking everybody's ass.
Yeah, I think if you considered him a defensive end, you'd probably put him top 5, right? I think that'd be probably about where he belongs.
Maybe. What about Kevin Green?
That's more difficult because Kevin Green didn't have a ton of all-pro selections, but he was just a sack monster. He'd go after it every year. And he's quite a bit.
What about Green to me is a defensive tackle. What about LC Greenwood? Because that's a man that's not even in the Hall of Fame, and I would consider him as one of the top 15 guys I ever saw play.
I don't know if I would put LC in the Hall of Fame because he doesn't have he was not the best player on the defensive line to begin with.
You're after mine. How are you not going to put LC Greenwood in the Hall of Fame?
No, I put him in the Hall of Fame, not in the top 10. I'm saying I would definitely put him in the Hall of Fame. I'm a Steelers fan. I'm going for all Steelers in the Hall of Fame.
Obviously, I didn't put him in the top 10 either. I said top 15. I think he's a guy that's in that conversation, which is why I think it's so crazy he's not there. Another guy that I really almost put on this list because I did, but I didn't because he played after I turned 40, and that would be Julius Peppers.
No, I think Peppers is a good one too because he played for forever. He was productive for a long time, even into his really late 30s. He was a guy who would still go out there and give you between 8 and 11 sacks pretty much a year. I don't know if he was ever like a defensive player of the year kind of guy, but he was just very consistent. He was a guy who would go out there and be very consistent every year. Maybe never like the really sack leader at any point in his time in his career, but it's just a consistent player.
How about this? I believe that when you look at it, I believe defensive end is the most important position on a defense.
Yeah, I could go with that. I think it's probably defense. It's got to be on the defensive line. I think the line is always the most dominant section. I think the line is always the most important section. Either it's offense or defense. I think it's really where it comes down to, besides quarterback, obviously. So
just for the hell of it, I pulled up Yardbarker. I don't know why, because I usually don't even look at that site. But when they list their top 4 defensive players, those 3 guys that we think are the top 3 are number 2, 3, and 4 behind Lawrence Taylor.
Yeah. I mean, I'm okay with that. I mean, they really are. I think defensive end is probably one of the most productive positions, one of the easiest positions to measure, and also one of the most necessary ones because you have to stop the run and you have to sack the quarterback. You can do a little bit of everything.
All right, Sam, you want to tell everybody where they can find you on the internet?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook at Sam_Teets33. Constantly posting new stats, polls, articles there every day, so feel free to go check those out.
All right, what's our topic tomorrow, Sam?
I didn't think about one ahead of time. You want to do another state of the franchise?
If we have to.
Let's just wrap up the AFC North. Let's just do Baltimore tomorrow, and then I'll come up with a better topic for, I guess it'd be Thursday then.
All right, tomorrow, State of the Franchise, the Baltimore Ravens at 1 o'clock Eastern. You can listen to us on Twitch, Periscope, Facebook Live, YouTube, and you can hear the show later, probably 24 hours later, on any podcasting platform you can find, including iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, you name it. We're there. I want to remind everybody, check out the PEMF machine. Should have James Comerford on again tomorrow at 2:30 to talk a little bit more PEMF. He's actually going to have a demonstration with the machine, I believe, tomorrow. But make sure you check out Replenishing Care and Technologies, rcandt.com. So for now, for Sam Teets, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been watching The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.